From the headquarters of Telesur English in Quito, Ecuador, this is From the South, and I am Sweeney Gray. Start in Venezuela, where Foreign Minister Jorge Arreaza has shared a congratulatory letter from the Chinese President Xi Jinping addressed to President Maduro on his re-election. In the letter, Xi Jinping offered warm regards on behalf of the government and the people of China and vowed to work with Venezuela's government to strengthen trade and cooperation between the two countries. The Chinese president wished Nicolas Maduro good health and all the best as he carries out the functions of president for another term. And U.S. Vice President Mike Pence is promising retaliation against Venezuela after President Nicolas Maduro expelled 2 diplomats. Pence tweeted, "This provocation will be met with a swift response," but didn't give more details on any proposed action. On Tuesday, Maduro accused the U.S. Chargé d'Affaires, Todd Robinson, of being involved in a military conspiracy and ordering him and another senior diplomat to leave the country by Thursday. Our correspondent in Washington, Alina Duterte, has more details.
Secretary of State Mike Pompeo has told the House Foreign Affairs Committee that the U.S. will respond reciprocally to President Nicolas Maduro's expulsion of the top American diplomat in Venezuela. Pompeo said he received formal notice that charged the first Todd Robinson had been declared persona non grata, and he said that the U.S. would act in kind, suggesting he would remove Venezuela's top diplomat in Washington as well. Remember that Nicolas Maduro ordered yesterday the expulsion of 2 U.S. diplomats in Caracas in retaliation for a new round of U.S. sanctions over Venezuelan government. We'll be reporting on these reactions here in Washington, D.C.
Thank you, Alina, for that report. Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro has met with the former candidate Bertucci in Caracas. For more, let's go to our correspondent, Ian Bruce. Okay, so we're going to go back to that interview with Ian Bruce after this story, but Chile has followed through on its promise not to send an ambassador to Caracas following the elections. Foreign Minister Roberto Amparo said that the embassy will remain open, though. Currently, the Chilean embassy in Caracas is without a head because of the resignation of the last one in March. And the Henry Falcon campaign has hinted it will formally challenge the results of Sunday's election. In a press conference, Falcon's campaign representative, Claudio Fermin, said they have 20 days to lodge a complaint with the CNE. Nevertheless, he congratulated the citizens who went to the polls despite the abstentionist campaign. And Barbados goes to the polls on Thursday, and for the first time ever, over 200 CARICOM nationals will be able to vote. This comes after a major ruling from the Caribbean Court of Justice, which opened the door for CARICOM nationals who've been living in Barbados to vote. The Elections and Boundaries Commission says they couldn't register everyone who wanted to vote, but they were able to get at least 200 new names on the registration list. Prime Minister Frondell Stewart has threatened to leave the Caribbean Court of Justice if he is re-elected. The 2 leading candidates, Prime Minister Frondell Stewart and opposition candidate Mia Mottley, were out campaigning again on Tuesday. Stewart and Mottley have approached the election very differently, with Stewart taking the more traditional path, while Mottley has been tapping into social media to attract the young votes.
Because the performance of this government over the last 10 years gives the lie to any claim that the Democratic Labour Party does not have its fingers on the correct pulse in Barbados.
As you can see, you're now going on a little whistle-stop tour just here at my constituency office in Bush Hall. Got to give some love home at me for about 2 hours and then hit the road again. Gone. So you see now, another 15 seconds, we're in Mahaica. Watch the crowd. Watch the crowd. Things looking good, things feeling good.
Now, Lynette Eastman is a candidate who formed her own party, the United Progressive Party. With the economy a major focus in these elections, Eastman is trying to veer Barbados away from a tourism-centered economy.
We think there's a need to focus on developing the other sectors, such as agriculture, for example, which is a big one. So we can cut our food import bill, which is about $700 million at the moment. And also it would help Barbadians in terms of living healthier lives if we have access to more fruits and vegetables at reasonable prices. So the economy is one of the main issues. And in terms of diversifying the economy now, we're going to focus on the creative economy, which we believe that we have lots of skills and talents in Barbados already. So there's already something there fundamental already.
Now, earlier we spoke to Peter Wickham of the Caribbean Development Research Services to discuss how the campaigns have been run and, of course, to discuss the Prime Minister and the opposition's chances at the polls. Peter, thank you so much for joining us. Is it possible that Barbados could elect a woman as Prime Minister tomorrow? What are the polls saying?
Yeah, it's possible, and I would say it's highly. As far as the polls are concerned, we have a challenge with contemporary data where none has been released. But certainly the last time we polled, we had a distance of almost 40 percentage points between the lady that was leading the Barbados Labour Party and the gentleman who is currently Prime Minister. So I'd say all things being equal, it's highly likely that tomorrow we will make history and we will welcome our...
Okay, so the economy is a concern, Peter Wickham, and the IMF is actually the Inter-American Development Bank is saying that Barbados may have to turn to the IMF before the year is out. Also, we understand that Barbados has been having an issue with its foreign currency reserves. A bad economy very rarely favors the incumbent Prime Minister. How is the economy affecting the campaign?
Yeah, it's a major factor, and you're very right. You hit both issues. We have a foreign currency challenge. We're down to somewhere like 3 or 4 weeks foreign currency, where we normally like to have 12. And then we have questions of balance payments issues and a huge debt problem. You know, we have a debt problem that is galloping towards 160% of GDP, which is unprecedented for us, and it's really bad news. So our economy is struggling. I think that the bigger challenge that this government faces, though, is that they have had several plans to fix it, and none of them seem to have worked. So we're in a situation now where we have an election, and people feel, well, you know, you've had 8 years to deal with the problem. You've had 8 plans, and none of them have worked. So maybe it's time to step aside and give the lady an opportunity to see if her first plan can work. And I think that that's essentially what we've come down to.
Now, the incumbent Prime Minister, Frendel Stewart, says if he wins the election tomorrow, he's going to take Barbados out of the Caribbean Court of Justice. Why is he introducing this line of reasoning into his campaign?
Yeah, I mean, there are several theories that have been advanced, but essentially all of them revolve around the fact that it is a particularly bad idea to mention it from a policy perspective. And as far as political strategy is concerned, it's also a very bad idea. The presumption is that the Prime Minister has become frustrated and he's saying things which otherwise he would not have said under normal circumstances. He's appealing to the base of the Democratic Labour Party that is excited by this kind of nationalism. And as you know, that in politics, nationalism, race, these are touch points. And the presumption is that he's playing the nationalism card in the hope that he can capture some support. But that one has not gone down well in the national community. Most progressive people think that the CCJ is a good idea, as distinct from what he seems to want is to be able to choose the appeal court, because that's how our judges are chosen, by the Prime Minister, and let them have the final say. It has not sold well in the court of public opinion at all.
We thank Peter Wickham for that report. And we have news just coming in from Venezuela, where President Nicolas Maduro has met with the former candidate Bertucci in Caracas. For more, let's go to our correspondent, Ian Bruce. Hello, Ian. Are you hearing me?
Hello, Sorini. Yes. Yes, indeed, Sorini. Very surprising and quite significant news out of Caracas in just the last 10 minutes, 15 minutes. Completely out of the blue, the presidential palace suddenly started transmitting pictures, video of President Nicolas Maduro meeting, as you said, the former opposition candidate Javier Bertucci. Now, the reason this is important is because throughout the campaign, President Nicolas Maduro had said after the elections he wanted to have a broad, inclusive dialogue with all the opposition candidates, with all other sections of the opposition, and with all sections of society to try and bring people together and face the issues that Venezuela needs to face. Now, that was repeated over and over again. Hardly anybody responded to that on the other side, on the opposition side, and indeed after the elections he repeated the call. Henry Falcon said he wouldn't be taking part in any dialogue, and so it was quite. And even yesterday, when President Maduro was officially proclaimed the winner of the election, he repeated that call, and he said the dialogue will begin tomorrow, i.e., today. I think most people understood that as a sort of rhetorical gesture that he wanted to begin as soon as possible. So it was actually quite a surprise when it appears that that dialogue in some form has started, because out of the blue, President Maduro has met with the third-placed opposition candidate, Javier Bertucci.
Thank you so much for that report, Ian Bruce. And we're going to take a short break now, but join us again after this look at what our multimedia colleagues are reporting. Welcome back. The fourth meeting of National Dialogue resumed Wednesday in Nicaragua, with talks focusing on ending violence in the country. Talks began at 10 a.m. local time, chaired by the Catholic Church's Commission of Mediators and Witnesses. Strong security measures were adopted outside of the church as opposition groups continue to demonstrate. A commission from the Organization of American States was invited by the government and is expected to attend the talks. Minister Dennis Moncada has criticized the dialogue's agenda, saying that it includes 40 points that lead to a route to a coup d'etat against the government, which is outside of the Constitution and in violation of the country's laws.
The agenda we're looking at, members of the Episcopal Conference, this agenda includes approximately 40 points, and it's an agenda that, when you look at it, leads us to a particular point, the design of a route for a coup d'etat, a route to change the government of Nicaragua, the government of national reconciliation, in a matter that is outside of the Constitution.
Argentina's teachers are demanding better wages and rejecting an IMF agreement that could demand the country spend even less on public education. Let's go to Edgardo Esteban, who is at the protest in Buenos Aires.
The Teachers' March is taking place in the capital of Argentina, with people coming from at least 5 different areas of the country. They are gathered here to demand Mauricio Macri administration begin hearing across the country to discuss higher wages for teachers. They want the minimum to be set, according to inflation levels for this year, around 25%. There is a lot of expectation for this large march that reflects the discontent that the teachers have. It also falls around the 30th anniversary of the first federal march. It appears not much has changed since then. They are showing they won't back down in this fight for their rights and in defense of public education in Argentina.
Thank you, Egado Esteban, for that report. The University of the West Indies says the new gender policy will help the university diagnose its own issues while allowing it to help the region address gender social policy issues across the Caribbean. More importantly, it will make it easier for the institution to mainstream gender across the board.
The University of the West Indies gender policy is not only about the attainment of gender parity, it is far more inclusive and diverse and also takes into account sexual preferences and non-binary identifications, as well as religious freedom, ethnicity, and other self-identification that affirm the entire humanity.
Now let's return to Barbados, where campaigning comes to an end tonight. We go now to Laura Prado, who's in Barbados, covering the electoral campaign. Laura, you spent some time with the third-party candidate, Lynette Eastman, today. How is she feeling in the lead-up to the election?
Hi, Soyini, nice to greet you. Indeed, as you were saying, she is one of the representatives of the principal parties that are running for the constituencies, the 30 constituencies of the 11 parishes here in Barbados. She is one of the two women that are running for the post. Among them, there is also Mia Modley from the Barbados Labourist Party, and the other representative of the party is the actual Prime Minister Prandol Stewart from the Democratic Labourist Party, and the other parties are Solution Barbados United Progressive Party, who the representative is Lynette Eastman, that we were talking with her today in the afternoon. The main topics that all candidates are exposing to the electorate is to stimulate the economy, which Barbados is very dependent on its tourism, to create better workplaces, and to facilitate better salaries and pensions for the Barbadians. Soyini, these are the main topics that the main parties who are running for the post among this United Progressive Party, who Lynette Eastman is representing, are the main topics.
Really quickly, Laura Prado, you spoke to Lynette earlier, so that's Lynette Eastman from the United Progressive Party. But the two main parties are the Barbados Labour Party and the Democratic Labour Party. They are having their closing rallies this evening. Which one are you going to?
Well, Soyini, we, as maybe you can hear around me, there is music running. It's coming from the stage where it's going to be talking the representative of the Barbadian Labourist Party that is very close by, and in the Independence Square will be delivering their last speeches the representative of the Democratic Labourist Party. I will be attending to both of them to take images and impressions of the electorate that will be voting tomorrow from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. and we will be sharing with you any information that comes from here. But I also wanted to share with you something very relevant of these elections, which is the representation of women. That is not new for the region, but we must take into consideration that in Latin America and the Caribbean is a very conservative society, very patriarchal, so this is a really big accomplishment of women's into women's rights and women empowerment. Soyini.
Thank you so much for that, Laura Prada. We'll be checking in with you all day tomorrow because tomorrow will be the election in Barbados. Now, with 4 days until the presidential elections in Colombia, several pollsters have presented analysis ahead of the vote. Despite the mounting evidence of widespread fraud in the legislative elections of 2014 and in March, the registrar has insisted the elections were clean. So how do people feel about the Colombian polls?
Election, while some criticize it, others defend its projections.
In Colombia, the surveys are more precise and sophisticated. They try to go to more diverse places. 10 years ago, it wasn't uncommon to see surveys of only 4 cities of the country. Today, the samples try to go to towns and ask different people from the country.
This is why some presidential candidates are asking for political control.
As a measuring instrument, it is necessary to control it, and that is what the law lays out. I think the National Electoral Council should exercise these controls, and it should be a non-biased institution, not influenced by political parties.
Some analysts say that these polls are a significant measure of opinion ahead of this election.
The polls determine the vote for a lot of people that are still undecided, because sometimes their favorite is not doing well in the polls, so they decide to go for another candidate that will have more chances to win. So this strategic vote is really important.
However, in this political contest, most Colombians don't trust the polls. The polls, reliable or not, currently hold candidate Iván Duque at 41.5% against Gustavo Petro's 29.5%.
No, when I go to vote, I don't care about the polls.
No, when I go to vote, I don't care about the polls.
I think the polls lie, and I don't trust them.
The State Council and the MOE, which has independently monitored elections since 2007, have been calling on the registry and CNE to urgently reinforce the vote counting software since February. Gustavo Petro, whose anti-corruption crusade has led to the incarceration of dozens of corrupt politicians over the past 15 years, reiterated on Wednesday that he will call for a massive protest if on Sunday there are indications of fraud in the first round.
To talk more about what's ahead for Colombia, we're going live to Bogota to talk to Richard McCall. He's a British independent journalist who specializes in the peace process. Richard, let's talk about leading candidate Duque, former President Uribe, and why a right-wing coalition is popular in Colombia right now. Also, can we talk about what we can expect in terms of any significant shifts in economic and foreign policy if the right-wing win?
Well, thank you. Yes, as you say, the right-wing coalition led by Iván Duque, but who's believed to be very much the let's say, follow in the footsteps of the former president, Álvaro Uribe Vélez. Yes, we're expecting him to win this first round. At least all polls seem to say that. Should he win it, and voter intention is standing around 41.5% in his favor, should he win this first round, then he'll go into a second round on the 17th of June. What do we think about economic policies? He will be a conservative person, fiscally conservative. And of course, any, let's say, right-wing policies will draw him very much in line with President Trump in the United States. There'll be a Duque presidency would be very much aligned with the same policies that Trump would have, really, in that kind of thing with regards to coca eradication and the like.
Now, Richard, in the second place, we have the leftist Gustavo Petro, who's a former Bogota mayor. Who's he popular with and why?
Well, the Bogota mayor, Gustavo Petro, has a huge following amongst the working class and amongst sort of, let's say, students. He promises a lot. He's got a more of a European feel to his campaigning and to his politics. Yes, he talks about greater welfare, more, let's say, repartition of wealth across the board, higher taxes for the rich. But at the same time, he is a former guerrilla. He was formerly of the M19 guerrillas. He demobilized in the early 1990s. And like you say, he was a mayor of Bogota. But to be left-wing in Colombia is to carry a great deal of stigma because, of course, of the 50-plus years that Colombia has been facing a conflict against Marxist, Leninist groups such as the FARC, who have now has now signed a peace agreement, but of course there's still an ongoing conflict with the ELN, the National Liberation Army.
Richard, let's talk about the ELN. Your area of expertise is the peace process. So can you talk about the status of the talks with the ELN and how that will be affected by the new leadership?
Thank you. Well, the ELN, it's been an on-again, off-again process with the ELN, and we recently, after President Moreno of Ecuador rescinded, let's say, Ecuador's invitation to host the talks in Quito after the disappearance and the death of two journalists, Ecuadorian journalists, and their driver this last month. Of course, this was by the FARC dissidents, this killing, but at the same time, President Lenin Moreno said he was no longer going to accept the peace talks with the ELN in his country. So they've been moved to Havana, Cuba. They stop and they start. There will be a ceasefire in place for elections so that people can vote democratically. Should the right-wing Ivan Duque, backed by former President Alvaro Uribe, should he come into power, we can expect that these peace talks will probably be, I would say, be cancelled. They will prefer to withdraw from the peace talks, that government, and start over with a more hardline set of rules. And it would include a disarming for the ELN, or, absolute unilateral ceasefire. Should Gustavo Petro get in, then we can expect more peace talks, more leeway, let's say, for these guerrilla groups, the leftist guerrilla groups.
Thank you so much. We've been talking to independent journalist Richard McCall, who's based in Colombia, about the upcoming elections and the status of the peace talks. Now, hundreds of protesters gathered in front of the presidential palace in Manila to denounce Philippines President Rodrigo Duterte on the first anniversary of the Marawi siege and the declaration of martial law in Mindanao. Protesters burnt and ripped apart a banner depicting Duterte holding a U.S. flagged bomb in one hand and a bloodied knife in the other. The battle for Marawi saw a 5-month offensive by Philippines government forces against militants affiliated with the self-proclaimed Islamic State group. Thousands of local residents were displaced in the fighting, which left residential areas in ruins. The U.S. Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, has doubled down on criticisms he made of Iran and the Iranian nuclear deal at the start of the week, where he threatened to impose crippling sanctions on the country.
A new direction for the president's Iran strategy. We will apply unprecedented financial pressure, coordinate with our DoD colleagues on deterrence efforts, support the Iranian people, perhaps most importantly, and hold out the prospect for a new deal with Iran. It simply needs to change its behavior. We seek to work with as many partners, friends, allies as possible to achieve the common objective of stopping all of Iran's nuclear and non-nuclear threats.
And we've come to the end of this news brief. For these and many other stories, you can find them on our website at telesurtv.net/English. You should also join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. For Telesur English, I'm Soini Gray. Thank you so much for watching.
The Barbadian people are summoned to go to the polls for general elections on May 24th.